Ever since I moved here from California about a year ago, I've been telling people how much better Colorado is than California. And one of those ways is that in California, there's no way I would ever have gotten somebody who had actually been elected to state office to be my opening act. So, thank you very much. I'm just not that big a fish, at least not in California. So I'm going to talk more general impressions and principles about what's happened in California in my lifetime and why I left. And if you want to look up lots of facts and figures, I can tell you where to do it, but I'm not going to bore you with those. For a while, I was telling people that we should all be looking very carefully at Detroit as an example of what the left will do to us if we let them. But I think Detroit is so far gone that nobody thinks it's a good example of anything anymore. Oh, I need to move over? Okay. In fact, there's a great quote about rent control from somebody on the Nobel Prize Committee for Economics saying that next to bombing, rent control is the next best way to destroy a city. Well, I think that's what socialism did to Detroit. California, on the other hand, I think still looks attractive enough in some ways that they'll still try to portray it as a positive example of what we should all be doing and looking towards. But I'm going to try and do my best to kill that theory off here tonight. There was a book and a movie years ago called The Ugly American. I have my own spin on this. There was an Ugly Californian, which is a Californian who moves to another state and then tries to turn it into exactly what they fled. So I'm trying to do my best to be the opposite of that. So thank you for that. One of the themes I'm going to talk about here today is how California, I don't have slides, I have notes. You'll have to look at me, sorry. He's better looking than I am too, so. But California has been doing its best to kill the golden goose for a long time. And I don't know how many people have actually realized this. Certainly the Democratic Party in California hasn't seemed to realize this. One of the big unseen trends in this has been the death of manufacturing in California. So for a long time, California was known as, it was the place of Silicon Valley, high tech, aerospace, entertainment industry, a bunch of these other things. But in recent years, there's been several surveys of which states have the best and worst business climates in the country, and California has been winning those for worst place steadily for the past several years, probably something like a decade now. Just to give you a couple facts and figures here, the unemployment rate in California is about 9.8% now. It's tied for highest of any state in the country. There are a lot of reasons for that. I want to go over a few of the examples of what's happened in manufacturing there to start with and then go on. So one of them is the aerospace industry. It used to be really big in Southern California. Basically, that has declined drastically ever since the end of the Cold War. It turns out most of it was based on government military spending. Boeing down in Orange County and Lockheed and also in the Bay Area and some others. They are winding down their businesses there a lot for a lot of reasons. I have a friend who's an aerospace engineer at Boeing down in Long Beach. He's one of the last there. Basically, the only reason he's there is because they still do work on the C-130s there, and that's his plane. And when they finally decide to move that, that'll be gone too. So aerospace has gone way down. There's hardly anything left in California. I was very pleased to see that there's actually some aerospace industry here in Colorado and in Longmont, where I live now. The other interesting one is, I don't know if people are old enough here to remember when Ross Perot was running for president in '92. He made this big deal about how it makes a huge difference whether you make microchips or potato chips. And at the time, California was one of the world's biggest manufacturers of microchips. Not anymore. There's a lot of reasons for that. One of the ones that I thought was really interesting that I just came across recently, to go back. So I'm a big James Bond movie fan. I don't know if anyone else is, but I even like the bad ones, the Roger Moore ones. So I was watching one of them, A View to a Kill, again recently, and there's this great scene where the villain, played by Christopher Walken, is explaining his evil plan to all his other cronies in the hopes that they'll cough up cash to help him make it happen. The evil plan is he's going to cause an earthquake in Silicon Valley. It's going to destroy the semiconductor manufacturing industry there. And all the cronies are basically going to be his own company that also makes them, and all these people from foreign countries overseas that are going to take over. When I saw this again recently, it occurred to me, that actually happened. Not the earthquake part, but there is hardly any more semiconductor or microchip manufacturing in California. It's all gone overseas, partly because labor is cheaper. But one of the other interesting facts I just came across about this is just how many people here know what the Superfund law was? Anyone? So I'm like the only one. All right. So this is one of the worst federal laws ever passed. It basically said, if you're a business and the property you own has any pollution on it from anyone who has ever used that property ever, then you are fully liable for the cost of cleaning that up, essentially to the point where it would be safe for a residential neighborhood. And the original impetus for this was Loathe Canal, which was supposed this school that was built on a former chemical waste dump, essentially, and the chemical company that owned it sold it. One of the provisions they put in the deed was, this was a chemical waste dump. Whatever you do, don't ever put a school here. So they did, of course. But this law was in effect until about the mid-90s, and they basically ran around the country looking for chemical waste and stuff and finding it, and then screwing whoever owned the property now, whether or not they ever have had anything to do with cleanup or causing the waste in the first place, clean it all up. Well, it turns out Silicon Valley is one of the biggest concentrations of Superfund sites in the country. And this is not obvious at all. You'd hardly ever look at Silicon Valley. The article is pointing this out, that you'd never look at it and think of it as a post-industrial area. It's because when they built the factories there, they didn't have smokestacks on them, because smokestacks are ugly and they spew stuff into the air and people can see you're polluting. They had a much better idea. They decided to put it in the ground. In these big, like liquid containers. So they've got all these tanks under there from the solvents called TCEs, I think they used to use to clean semiconductors and manufacturing and stuff. They're all sunk in the ground, these big container tanks, in an earthquake zone. What do you think happened? Some of them cracked. They leaked a little bit. Feds came in and said, this is terrible. We've got to pay for all this cleanup. I guarantee you that all the CEOs and investors that owned those factories said, screw this. We're never building another factory here ever again. We're going to do it someplace else where they're not going to give us this kind of bullshit like maybe China. In China, they'll be like, spew in the air. We don't care. You just pay us more, A friend of mine just toured China, and she said it's the first place she's ever been where you could literally feel the air pollution on your skin. So that's one thing that's happened to destroy manufacturing in California. Another fun one is, does anybody know the name of the last functioning, it's gone now, the last functioning car factory west of the Mississippi, and where it was? It was called the NUMMI plant. It was in Fremont, California, where I moved from. It was a joint venture owned by GM and Toyota. When GM got taken over by the government, they said, we have to shut it down, it's not profitable. I actually had a friend whose wife was an accountant at the factory. She said, as far as I could tell, it was always profitable. But they shut it down. There are now no functioning car factories in the United States west of the Mississippi. Some would argue none north of the Mason-Dixon line. But so what happened to this factory? It got taken over, bought for pennies on the dollar by Tesla, which makes electric cars. Which, in theory, I think is a great idea, but it turns out that Tesla gets most of its business due to this thing where other car companies basically have to pay Tesla to make cars to make up for the fact that their cars are not green enough. Without that, all Tesla cars would be completely unprofitable. But good news that California left had all these wonderful ideas for replacing these sources of revenue. One of them is software companies. So that's what their high-tech now means in California. It's no longer hardware manufacturing pretty much at all. A friend of mine worked he was a test engineer at one, and his company basically offshored all of their manufacturing to China long term. That's it. So he basically quit engineering in California, moved back to Washington State to go into real estate with his brother. Another great idea they had, I'll talk a little bit more about the software companies in a little bit. I work for one, so they're not completely bad, but they have the drawbacks. They also had the great idea, we're going to do green energy. So you may have heard of one of these green energy companies they thought would be such a great thing. They built a nice, beautiful, brand new building right next to the NUMMI plant. They were going to be the new thing. President Obama came and spoke there. It was called Solyndra. The idea is going to make solar panels, put on everybody's roofs, especially these big box retailers, and then they found out, oops, we can't make them any cheaper than China can, and China can make them really cheap. Oops. So they went under, and that's pretty much been the story with virtually every other green energy scam they've come up with. The other fun one is, so they said, oh, well, you know, one of the things the government's really good at is infrastructure. So tell you what, let's build a high-speed rail train through the Central Valley of California. This will be great. You'll be able to travel by train from LA to San Francisco or back in just, you know, maybe twice as long as it takes by plane. Plane ride's about an hour and a half, so maybe 3 or 4 hours. Faster than driving, right? Yes, exactly. Then the complications started setting in. Yes, it is theoretically possible to make trains that go really fast. China has one that goes from the airport to Shanghai and back. I think it does something like 200 miles an hour, really fast. Well, in California, the places that are populated, like the San Francisco Bay Area and LA, they have a lot of people living there already, and they own most of the land. So if you want to try and build a big, long, straight line through there, you're going to have to condemn a lot of homes and kick a lot of people out and pay them for the property that you're taking from them. They decided that would be way too expensive. We can't do that. Let's not do that. What we'll do instead is we'll go way out to the middle of the Central Valley on the north end, and that's all farmland there, so it'll be easy to condemn right away, nice, straight, flat. And then we'll have that start in the north end of the Central Valley and go way down south to a place in the southern Central Valley. So it would sort of be, like going from LA to San Francisco and back, only a little further east. It turns out, though, the places they're doing the starting and end points here, nobody lives there. I'm not kidding. The Central Valley is very unpopulated. In order for anybody from San Francisco or LA to get there, what do you got to do? You got to drive 2 or 3 hours to get there on the top end, and then you get down to the bottom end, and you got to drive another 2 or 3 hours on the other end. Well, right now it takes about, depending on traffic, 5 to 8 hours to drive straight from San Francisco to LA in the first place, which is why a lot of people don't even bother flying, right? If you fly, you got to get to the airport early. It takes you a while to get there, an hour or two. You got to be there an hour or two early. Then you get, well,
That's a highlight.
Some people enjoy that.
And if you pay extra, they give you a full screening. And then you get to the other end, you're in LA, you don't have a car. It's impossible to get anywhere in LA without a car, trust me. So then you got to go get a car, or somebody's got to pick you up, and you got to drive another hour or two from the airport in LA to get wherever you're going. So you're better off driving, especially if you're traveling with more than one person. So I call this, in Alaska, they have the bridge to nowhere. This is the train to and from nowhere. And it's going to cost way more than they said it would. By little comparison here, they apparently just finished brand new half of the Bay Bridge in San Francisco. I think it only took about 10 years longer than they thought it would, and it only cost about $10 billion more than they thought it would. And the high-speed rail is probably going to do the same sort of thing. Skipping ahead, there's some good writers about this. One of my favorite is a guy named Joel Kotkin, who's a professor of geography in Salinas. And the way he puts it is that we're seeing the emergence of a new class structure in California and similar places. So the old class structure was you have the rich, you have the poor, and you have the middle class. Well, California, the poor is now basically government welfare clients, and California has a third of the nation's total welfare caseload, despite having only 12% of the population. The middle class is now essentially government employees. That's it. I mean, there's people that have shops and stuff, but as a political force, they're powerless. They're nothing. So the way I put this now is that in California, what you have at the government level is government of the unions, by the unions, and for the unions. So it used to be that the only reason Republicans got elected was because some of the union workers were cops or prison guards, and they were somewhat tough on crime. Well, then they figured out that the Democrats would pay them more. So they basically defected and said, we don't need Republicans anymore. We're going to go support the Democrats. The last gubernatorial election, Meg Whitman tried to revive that alliance with the law enforcement and correctional unions by basically promising not to touch their pensions, saying she'd only go after the teachers' unions' pensions and those people. And the cops basically said, no, we don't need you. Screw you. We'll deal with Jerry Brown. He's a Democrat. Okay. So basically, that's California is now a one-party state. When I left, the income tax was 10%. They've raised it to 13% since then. The sales tax is 10% also. So both of those are at least twice as much as Colorado, which is why I say Colorado has half the taxes and twice the freedom as California. For now, yes, right, exactly. Hopefully we can keep it that way. That's my goal. If you're not scared already, I'm trying to scare you a little bit about this prospect. Just some stuff about the quality of life also. Oh, the other fun thing they did. So they even managed to piss off some of my liberal friends in the high-tech software industry in California. They imposed a retroactive tax on stock options. Yes. So if you had a successful IPO in the past and you didn't pay enough taxes on it, according to them, they said, well, guess what? We're going to come after it now. I've even pissed off some of my liberal friends in San Francisco. One works for Twitter. Speaking, I skipped a little bit about the software industry there. So one of the things they will point to is that, we have these great high-tech software companies like Twitter in San Francisco. They're doing great. They're our model of success for the future. Well, San Francisco has a payroll tax, basically, and Twitter is exempt from that. They made a sweetheart deal with the city. The lefties got all pissed off about it, but the city people said, no, they're going to bring us money. We want it. So they did it. However, the left critique of this has some truth to it, which is that the theory behind this was that it would benefit the rest of the people in the city by, they'd create jobs, people who would work there would go out to eat and stuff. Well, Twitter has all their food brought in. If you work there, you don't need to go out to eat. It's a nice perk, but it doesn't benefit anyone outside of Twitter. What else here? Oh, here's some fun stuff about the indicators. So California was a leader in the tax limitation movement back in the late 70s with Prop 13. They've renumbered since, so they're up to like 20-something again. But one of the drawbacks of that is the legislature responded to it by saying, well, we can't raise, property taxes anymore. We're going to raise, or income taxes or sales taxes. We're going to raise every fee we have in the books. And they did that for a long time. It's now reached the point, huh? Yeah, exactly. Where do you think they got the idea to do it here? Yes. In fact, something like 20 years later, they passed another initiative saying, no, you got to get 75% approval from the voters to raise any other fees too, but by then they'd been jacked up way high. To give you a couple examples of that from my own personal experience, does anyone want to guess how much a red light camera ticket costs in California? $500. So of that, the interesting thing about it is the split. So only about a third of it actually goes to the city, and a third of it goes to the state, and a third of it goes to the company that operates the cameras, which is based in Australia. So it's basically a great recipe for taking, 2/3 of $500 right out of that city's economy and sending it elsewhere. I actually had to go to court for mine. I was going to challenge it, and they said, was it you? Yes. Sorry, no other challenges. I had a good reason. I was trying to avoid not getting hit by another car, so.
Yes, that's not an excuse.
Yeah, I know, exactly. Speeding tickets there are in the neighborhood of $275 to $300. So when I got my first speeding ticket here in Colorado, it was only $120. I almost laughed and said, "You call that a ticket?"
Don't give them ideas.
Yeah, Right, exactly, I know. Another fun story here, in preparation for this talk, I went to go see what a house like mine would cost. When I bought a house here, what a house like mine would cost in San Francisco. So the closest equivalent I could find that was the cheapest was twice as much. It was 30 years older, had much less features. It was not in the worst neighborhood of San Francisco, but it was in the second worst. And the one I have here in Longmont is in a very nice neighborhood. It's one of the best. What else can I talk about? Oh, here's another fun part. I got to tell you this part. So, on the crime front, this is another one of the main reasons I left. My car got broken into 4 times in the last few years before I left Colorado. A couple times in our own parking garage. Crime is way on the upswing. Why? They got a federal court order saying that the California prisons are too overcrowded, so they have to release 40% of their inmate population. At first, they're trying to do this without letting them out loose in the public by dumping them on the county jails. And the county jails are not designed to house prisoners for very long. It's usually supposed to be just a few days. Now they're letting them out of there too. Crime is now skyrocketing there. And at the same time, because of all the budget cuts, they're cutting the police forces by something like 40 to 50% in cities like Oakland or San Jose. And the police are overpaid there too, by the way. Starting salary in Oakland, that just has the highest one in the states, $160,000 a year. Wow. Yeah, starting salary, first year out of the academy. That doesn't include benefits, but they're pretty ritzy. Yeah. Yeah. San Francisco's second, because San Francisco's such a dangerous place. Oakland actually is dangerous. You might deserve combat pay for being a cop there, but the other thing is, so part of what's gone on here is there have been about a half a dozen cities that have gone bankrupt in California since the crash. Vallejo, San Bernardino, Mammoth, Stockton. Apparently the bank repossessed one of Stockton's parking garages. I thought that was very funny. And then just to give you another sort of single issue example before I finish of, a very concrete, specific way that Colorado is much better than California on the personal freedom front. And marijuana is not a big difference, really. If you want to smoke pot in California, you pretty much can. But guns, no way. You cannot get a carry permit in any part of California where anyone lives, period. Unless you are a big campaign contributor to the sheriff. And by big, I mean, thousands of dollars a year. All sorts of restrictions. They have a 10-day waiting period to buy a new gun. You have to get something they call a handgun safety certificate to buy a handgun, any kind. You can only buy a handgun on their approved list of handguns, and then you can't carry it openly or concealed. You can't have a semi-automatic with a detached magazine, period. Undetachable. You can't have a gun that can hold more than 10 rounds in magazine, period. And of course, no silencers, no matter what, if you're federally licensed and all that, they don't care. Same thing for full auto guns, they don't care. They even banned 50 caliber sniper rifles. That was signed by Governor Schwarzenegger, who really ought to know better because he probably used them in tons of his movies.
They just tried to pass background check for ammunition purchases.
That's the other thing. They've got a whole slew of new evils in the works for there, and there's nobody to stop them. If they can do it there, they'll try to do it here too. So just to conclude, this is why California has had something like 3.4 million less people net living in the state over the past 10 years. I'm one of them. I contributed to that.
No, because they're coming here. Don't cheer.
Yeah, we are. We are. Hopefully enough of us are coming here because I'm a good one. Yes, I know.
What percentage is that of the whole population?
I think California's population is around 45 million. So it's a little less than 10%.
5%?
It's more than 5, a little less than 10. Yeah, it's between there. That's a lot. This is the first. This first redistricting is the first one ever where California's congressional representation did not go up, which is probably a good thing. So with that, I'd just like to thank the audience for listening to me and having me, and take some questions. Yes.
You did a great job of kind of describing a lot of the symptoms of California's decline. What's your take on what some of the root causes were.
Tim, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I'll repeat the question. So the question is, what are the root causes of all of these factors going down? I actually think a lot of it just comes down to how nice a place is to live in terms of the real estate. So California's got a really nice climate. It's very attractive. A lot of people move there still, and everyone I ever heard move there, they say the reason is because it doesn't snow there. You know, they like the weather. They like the outdoors. I like snow, so I'm happier here. But the other part of that is that the more expensive it becomes to leave someplace, the more you can hold people hostage to it. And they're starting to leave California now, but it's mostly the poor, working class people that are leaving. The rich are still staying because they still like it there. So, yes?
I was going to say, would you think it might have something to do with the principles or lack thereof of Republicans there and standing up to some of this?
Well, yes and no. Don't worry, I'll repeat all the questions. The question is, does it have to do with the principled nature of the Republicans there? There really are or were some good Republicans there. One of them, Chuck DeVore, left to go work at a think tank in Texas. Tom McClintock is still there. He's great, but he's he's all by himself pretty much. There really aren't that many. We had Republican governors in the 80s. Duke Majan actually had a tax surplus and gave money back to the taxpayers. I had a friend who actually got a check. Wow. But not since then. The Republicans, everything I grew up, saw growing up in California and what I've been seeing here in Colorado too, present company accepted, just goes to prove that the most accurate description I've ever seen of the Democrats and the Republicans is the Democrats are the evil party and the Republicans are the stupid party. Republicans shoot them in the... There was a great saying about the Palestinians that they never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity, and I think the same thing could be said of the Republican Party in general. Great questions over this way? Yes?
I know they're California are defecting and moving to Colorado and also Texas. A lot of the majority of them are, but why are they moving here? I mean, what is the draw to Colorado from California?
The draw to Colorado from California, why move here? It's nicer here. You people are nice. Man.
There's Montana,
Utah. See, Californians, a lot of them, they think that Utah is this horrible Mormon hellhole of, where it's no fun. I actually think Salt Lake City is nice. I like it. But there is a high-tech community here now, corridor between Boulder and Denver. I'm working at a high-tech company that has offices in both places, so there's that. Real estate's so much cheaper here. Scenery is beautiful. And again, this really surprised me after we moved here. You people are nice. I don't know how to say this. I don't know. It's actually, I think Coloradans are a little bit too nice. I mean, I just finished reading the blueprint.
You're in California and you can leave and you're going to pick a place to go. Nevada's high desert dominated by mining and gambling.
Yep.
And retirees.
Utah is dominated by the Mormon Church.
Yep.
Texas is Texas. Nothing's wrong with that. I love Texas, but to a Californian, it's Texas.
Well, a lot of Californians have gone to Texas too. In fact, that's the #1 destination for recovering Californians like myself.
Are Republicans leaving, the Independents leaving, or are the Democrats leaving?
I think it's mostly the apolitical. It's generally the poor and the working class. Yeah, if they're not poor enough to be on welfare, but they're not rich, and they actually have private sector skills and jobs, they're leaving California.
A lot of small businesses.
Yep. Small businesses. Yeah, there are a whole bunch of companies that make knives that went to Oregon from California. Any other questions over this way, or are I coming back here? Yes?
Tim, you mentioned the decline almost to oblivion of manufacturing in California, and we're seeing the same thing happen in Colorado. With the manufacturing that we have had. We've seen gun manufacturers move out, but not just that. We've also seen a lot of computer industry manufacturers say, no, sorry, can't do it. Taxes are too high. We're sending it to China.
Yep.
So is there any recommendation that you have for sending a message to our Republican legislators to kick them in the butt somehow and go, look, you have a perfect example of what will happen to this state that you can point to the West. here's what is happening. Let's stop it before it gets there. I haven't heard one state legislator say anything in comparison of us as far as a meaningful comparison to what's happening in California, what has happened in California and what's happening here now.
Yeah, I think that, like Governor Perry of Texas is very acutely aware of this, and he's been trying to poach all the companies from California and other states that he can. I don't see a lot of this awareness in Colorado. The guy I mentioned earlier, Joel Kotkin, I think has a great idea that small businesses and the, like you might call the, brown energy industries are a great natural constituency for the Republicans if only they cultivate them. So, but they should do that. But I'm not them, so I can't make them do it. Question in the back, then I'll come back over here.
I just ask you to describe going to the Department of DMV and going in there, the difference between California and, well, I go to Weld County. Just describe it.
Okay, the question is describe the experience between the DMVs. I'm not actually sure that I'll give you the description you want, because one of the few ways in which I actually think California is better than Colorado is the DMV.
No way.
And I never ever thought I would say the DMV of California would be better than anywhere. But it used to be really bad, I will say this. You used to basically go there, get in line, stand in line for like 2 hours before anyone would see you. A friend of mine figured out that if you went there right before closing, they had this rule that none of the employees could leave until everyone in line had been helped. So we'd go there 5 minutes before closing, and he'd get in the door, they'd lock the door behind him, and then right at 5 o'clock, everybody who was doing anything other than serving the people in line would be retasked, and they'd have to actually help everyone, and the line would move really fast. But there would be people, at the front of the line that had been in it for 2 hours before he got there, and he'd be out in 15 minutes. So it used to be horrible. But the advantages are they have everything in one building. You don't have to go to one place to register your car, another place for your driver's license. I couldn't understand that when I got here. It's like, what? You go to 2 places, huh? And they're open on Saturdays.
Whoa.
Yeah, they're not open on Saturdays here. I was like, what? They're going to take a day off of work? What the hell? So, question there?
Yeah, the impact immigration has had on California, both legals and illegals.
It certainly has had an impact. I think the impact of the illegal immigration peaked during the housing boom. And I think basically, you can sort of see this. After the housing boom, a lot of the Mexican restaurants closed down and got replaced by Indian restaurants. I think that what that meant was that the Mexicans were going back home to Mexico, and the Indians were still coming in on high-tech H-1B visas and staying. I'm sure a lot of the people that came in and got on welfare during that period are still there, and I'm sure more people are trying to. And I'm sure that's a big part of that, 33% welfare caseload. But I don't think the Mexican immigration to California is that big a problem anymore, just because there ain't no jobs for the Mexicans to take when they get
They
there.
don't even want to go to California?
No, they don't. They'd rather go to Texas. Texas has jobs.
But don't you think some socialism that comes from Mexico is infiltrated into
I do think that's a big part of it, although when I lived in Santa Barbara, one of my friends there described the Hispanic part of town as the actual free market part of town, because they were all operating on the black market. Like, now, screw these laws. We don't need that. We don't need no stinking laws. And it was the white part of town was all fussy about the regulations and everything. So I do think it's a problem. I do think that Hispanic immigration was cultivated by the left to try and recruit people to basically be their cannon fodder and their base and all that. And that's still there to some extent. I just don't think it's growing all that fast now. Most of the growth now is going to be indigenous and having kids and growing up probably to be Americans, just like the rest of us. Yes?
Your comment was a great lead into my comment and question, which, what about the impact of the regulatory environment, of the taxing situation, and especially the regulations? Because that is such a huge added cost to doing business, and especially to small business, which doesn't have an entire department that can dedicate their lives to dealing with the huge regulatory burden. So if you could talk about that, and just that and the erosion of property rights, I think has been tremendous in California.
Well, I do think it's a huge cost. I'm sure it's probably the biggest part of why California is such a hostile business climate. I'll do you next. I had a friend that moved from California to Massachusetts and says that Massachusetts is a better state to do business in after Romney was governor. And to me, here that Massachusetts was a good state to do business in was really shocking, and part of why I decided I got to get the hell out of here. Just one other example of that, though, is so Berkeley and San Francisco still have rent control. Cambridge, Massachusetts used to have rent control. They got rid of it. California's still got it in some places. Back there?
I have a comment of what my perceptions are of a lot of Californians that move out here and other places, and I want to have your comments on my perceptions, how accurate they are, and what we can do to, I guess, mitigate it. And you'll see why I'm using the word mitigate. My perception of a lot of the Californians I've met, you excluded and several others, is that most of them are busybody control freaks, and then you couple that with the fact that a lot of people are economically illiterate. Okay, so their economies, California's economy is going into tank, and so they're going to move to places like here in Texas, and obviously not so much here anymore, that have more economic opportunities, and then they bring their, let's say, bad habits with them. So and to make an analogy, it's like a lot of them are like locusts that go to one place and decimate it, and then move on to somewhere else. And I don't know what we can do about that other than maybe try to educate people, but nobody wants to hear that they're wrong. So, am I right, Tim? Or
Yeah, it's basically, I think what you're talking about is the same thing I was talking about, how Californians, flee the state for economic reasons and then try to turn their next state into, exactly what they fled from. I mean, in Oregon and Washington, they have, signs they put on their cars that say, welcome to Oregon or welcome to Washington, now go home to California. That's a bit hostile. I prefer the education approach myself. The main thing I can say is just play up why Colorado's better. Colorado is better than California in so many ways.
Well, why would we do that? We don't want people coming here.
Well, if they're coming here for the right reasons.
I mean, I go to CU Boulder. I don't want any more California people coming here.
I work with people that go to CU Boulder, and they're from Colorado, and they're plenty bad. Let me tell you, it's easy to blame Californians for the problem, but that's not all there is to it. I just finished reading the blueprint, and trust me, from what I read in there, Republicans did a bunch of things to screw themselves over royally in there, like, just to name one, letting the enemy pass campaign finance laws to defund you guys, and then letting them get away with it. It's unconstitutional. Why wasn't it struck down? I have no idea, but it should have been. Did I see a question over here? Yes.
I was going to say, I'm originally from California. I was born and raised in California.
Get him!
It's okay. It's okay. I'm a conservative, Southern LA. After every Rose Bowl game, every year, when Southern Californians were in short-sleeve T-shirts and there was 10 feet of snow in Wisconsin and Illinois and all the rest of the country, we every year in January would get an influx of thousands of people. Now, being a native-born Californian, I never said those damn people from the rest of the country. It's not the people necessarily who are coming there. We have to teach them, to your point, about the principles that they were never taught. I can tell you as a product of the LA school system was terrible because they were taught very different. And when I went through the leadership program, the Rockies, in 2009, I got the education that I never got in California. I went through 12 years of regular primary education, went to Loyola Marymount, got a degree there in communication arts. And I can tell you, it's not so much the people. There's some great people. There's a lot of conservatives in California. There has been an influx of people from all around the world. California is probably the most metropolitan outside of New York state in the world. There's more minority communities there, and they're coming for freedom. They're coming for the opportunities that every one of us wants. So I'm always a little sensitive. I feel like I'm a Coloradan now. I've been here 15 years. Maybe not to you natives, but I'm getting there. But,
hey, I'm calling myself a Coloradan now, so if I count, you count.
But, there's a lot of good people there. My family's there. A lot of them are fed up. A lot of them are moving here simply because there is more economic freedom. There's less regulation. And I think the best thing we can do is engage them and try to get them to come to our side. A lot of people are on the fence, and that's why they're coming here.
Yeah, and you reminded me, I left out my line about the California public education system, which is, its unofficial slogan is "Thank God for Mississippi," because every once in a while Mississippi comes out worse than California in terms of the test scores. So that shows you how far. And it didn't used to be like that. It used to be one of the best school systems in the country, and it's really, really declined. Do we have another question somewhere? Yes.
Are there any states which are not being or are likely to take the longest to be Californicated?
Well, I'd have to give a plug for the Free State Project in New Hampshire. Not only was it founded by a friend of mine, but they're doing a lot of good things there. I wanted to move to New Hampshire, but I couldn't get a job there.
Yeah, I'm from New England. New Hampshire is not it. They will be Californicated in short order.
Well, maybe. They're certainly trying to do what they can to New Hampshire. My argument for why they won't is because Vermont's right next door, and it's lots more socialist. So if you want to be socialist, you can move to Vermont. Or to, Maine's not quite as bad as Vermont, but, you want to be cold way up north and have freedom, you can go to New Hampshire. You want to be cold in north, you can go to Vermont and be socialist. Are we out of time, or do we have time for one more question?
One more.
Last question? Who wants it? Anyone? I've answered all your questions. Yay. All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone.